and it's Paul Bell of the National Oceanography Centre who will talk about FLOWBEC, Flow and Benthic Ecology 4D.
Thanks, David. Right, this is a bit of an overview of the FLOWBEC project, which is funded by NERC DEFRA. It's a huge consortium project, and this is a good chunk of the names who are involved up there. I won't go through them all, but quite a few of them are certainly in the audience here. You've already seen a few talks concerning the FLOWBEC project, and I'll make reference to those as we go through, but rather than repeat myself, repeat those guys and what they've said about their particular specialities, I'll skim over those just with reference to them and show a bit more of the rest of what FLOWBEC is about and how it all fits together. So the overarching idea of FLOWBEC was to try and look at the physics of the ocean and try and understand how the flow goes through these high energy areas, how the waves behave and so on, how the turbulence interacts with the bathymetry, and then look at how different beasties are living on those particular types of hydrodynamics. And if we can understand how the beasties are using these areas naturally, and what it is about the different types of water flow and turbulence that they're going for, perhaps we can start to understand how they might react if you start putting machines of different types in there that extract energy. So it started in September 2011. We had 1.2 million in funding to cover the 3 years. It doesn't actually go all that far when you look at how many people are involved and what we actually did. So that the team have done a stunning job between them all. So in terms of progress so far, I'll split it up roughly into 3 sites that we've been looking at. The EMEC tide and wave sites, as it turned out, activities at Wavehub and Stratford Lock, and then a little bit about how this is being picked up by industry. At the EMEC wave and tidal sites, Benjamin has already given a fantastic talk on the FLOWBEC frame and all the acoustics on there. But that's in a wider context of trying to look at the behaviour of the animals and hydrodynamics remotely with marine radar. So that's something covering 4 or 5 kilometre range, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute. We've got bird observations with James, and James gave a great talk on what he was finding at the site. So we've got visual observations and confirmation of what different instruments are actually seeing and how that relates to real animals, birds. And under the water we've got the acoustics, so we're tracking what's going on in the air, on the water, underwater, and all in the context of the hydrodynamics as well. And on top of that we've got 3D modelling with FVCOM down at PML that's covering both the EMEC sites and also down at Wavehub. So in terms of the radar, this is my personal expertise, so I'll say a little bit more about this. We put a marine radar, expand ship's radar, at the EMEC tidal site substation back in 2011, and that's been recording since around that time. It records to a range of just under 5 kilometres. It is a standard ship's radar, but just with a visualisation system on there. But you don't just see hard targets on the radar, you also see what's called sea clutter. So you get a reflection of the sea surface roughness and waves, and from an inversion of what you can see in that sea clutter, you can extract currents. David McCann will be saying a bit more about that in the final talk today, so I won't go into too much more detail in theory there. But the practical upshot is that with a radar sat on the waterfront at EMEC, we can get maps of the current vectors across the whole site, roughly 200 metre spacing. Generally, you need to have a certain amount of wave activity there to see it on the radar and get this. So we don't always get readings, but when we do get readings, we get some very nice current patterns. And on the left here, we've got a flood tide in December 2012. With fairly sensible looking currents, and I don't know whether you can see, but the laser pointing. There we go. So can see there the main flow is going down to the southeast there, but there's a very nice counter-rotating eddy in there, which is thoroughly realistic. And on the ebb tide, the currents get funneled much more narrowly through between Green Home there and the southern tip of Edie, and there's a counter-rotating eddy in the other direction over there. And we can do this. It's been going all the time since 2011. We've got a huge data mortgage, unfortunately, but we've been working very hard on the processing, and we're almost at the stage now of being able to do this in near real time. Another thing that drops out of the wave inversion analysis is an estimate of water depth. So on the left here, this is the multi-beam data from the Edie, and on the right here, this is the radar-derived water depths from the same area that the currents are being extracted from. So it's the same grid, same area, and those are the water depths that are being used. The colour scales aren't quite the same, but the overlap is pretty excellent actually. Something else we see, I've known about this for years, that we can see birds on the radar. When I started doing this work in the Dee estuary near the lab in Liverpool, it's a Ramsar site for birds, and there's just thousands of birds flying around, and you can see them on the radar going from feeding sites to roosting sites and so on. And it's no different at the EMAC site. This is some bird tracking software that David McCann's produced, and just to orientate you, this is the bay area at the EMAC tidal site. The main flow channel is over here, and I think the open hydro platform is just out in there somewhere. But each of these is an individual target that has been tracked over just a single 5-minute record. So that's a single 5-minute record, and that's all the targets we've picked up. In that one down there is actually a small boat. But over here on the right hand side, we're zooming in and just about picking out a very nice spiral track there of a bird just moving around looking for stuff. And in the bay area, we've noticed the birds are generally moving quite a bit slower and having a bit more curved flight paths. Out of the main flow here, they look as though they're very much aligning their flight paths with the current. Not sure whether it's in line or against the current, or whether they're just going from A to B, or whether they're actually stopping and diving. But that's work ongoing. We've got the track files for the period when our FLOWBEC frame is in the water, and we're all ready to start looking through and trying to match up the diving bird targets that Benjamin has picked up with what we're seeing on the radar in terms of flight paths and where things disappear and so on. So it's really quite exciting work. By chance, just as during one of the frame deployments at the tidal site, there was a pair of breaching orca, large male orca, that Beth and the rest of the crew observed jumping out of the water a few hundred metres from the boat where they were. They were too busy trying to deploy the frame to take any pictures, unfortunately, but at least we know they were there, and we picked them up on the radar data, and you can hopefully pick out this series of dashed lines as the orcas moved past our deployment site, very close to the boat. I'm sure the guys were gutted that they couldn't pick the cameras up, and off up to the north. So we don't know where they went after that, because we were recording for about 5 minutes every 15 minutes. So it would have been lovely to see where they were, where they started from and where they ended up here. But at least we know what such targets look like now. And David's managed to pull out some statistics for how long they've spent on the surface, how long they've spent underwater, what their swim speed was, and so on. And you can, when you zoom in, you can actually pick up the two of them side by side as they go past. In terms of modelling, this is work being done by Ricardo Torres and Pierre Casanova in PML. We've got a FECOM grid that's nested in a wider area, and it goes down to pretty fine resolution here in the tidal site. and that's being used to produce not only tidal currents but also an estimate of turbulence. Just as a quick sense check, here there's some M2 tidal ellipses. The red ellipses are from the pulp red Allchem grid, which is a pretty coarse resolution grid of about 1 kilometre. It was produced about 15 years ago, so it's showing its age a bit now. But the FVCOM much finer resolution M2 ellipses there are looking much more sensible in terms of direction and variability, and we hope to be doing some comparisons of those with the radar-derived currents soon. And here's some plots of the turbulence generated by the model, so looking at the overall patterns, and this is some of the work that James has been looking at, trying to relate the patterns of turbulence and sea surface roughness with the beastie behaviour, and where things are, what are the visual cues that might be being picked up by the birds to figure out where to feed and so on. Just as a comparison, over here we've got a radar snapshot, probably just about to see this shear zone on the edge of the island there, matching up quite well with what's showing on the current. Moving on to Wavehub now. This is almost the three sites have been very much separate work packages almost, although they're starting to come together in places. Wavehub, we had originally planned to put the FLOWBEC frame, but as it turned out we simply didn't have the resources to get the ships to put our great 4-ton frame in there. But the background work has gone on there anyway. Ian Ashton has mentioned a little bit in one of the talks earlier today, where he's been looking at wave and current measurements around the Wavehub site. Dan Conley and Benthic University has had the HF radar overlooking that site since the start of the project. I'll say a little bit more about that after as well. And Ricky and Pierre in PML have been running the FVCOM model and validating that against various different data sets. They're starting to look for things such as the location of frontal systems around there, which are tending to be associated with areas of high biological activity. This is some of the work Ian's been doing in Ashton. So he had 4 wave buoys over in the same general area as the Wavehub site, and he's been finding quite significant spatial variability in the wave height patterns and the wave spectra. So he's finding up to 10% variation in wave power just between the measurements from the 4 buoys, and he's verified that these are not artifacts, these are genuine differences in wave height in a really small area of what's nominally open sea. An interesting result there. And I know that Daniel Connolly has been finding similar variations in the HF radar derived wave height measurements, and he's looking into how much of that is attributable to artifacts and how much is genuine variation. So there's a lot of work going on there looking at the spatial variability of wave height on nominally fairly open areas of the sea. That's the footprint of the HF radar. Just for reference, these outer arcs represent where you can comfortably derive current measurements. To obtain wave measurements, you need somewhat higher quality data, and it tends to be limited to about half the range that the current measurements can be taken. But it's still a very powerful technique. Being able to measure the currents and the waves from the shore has considerable advantages in these high energy areas, as I'm sure some of the people who work in these areas have found out. These are some comparisons between, on the left, this is 2 instances of data from FVCOM plotted over the same grid points as HF radar derived currents, and this is just showing that the spatial variability in this case the surface currents are matching up pretty well with the model outputs, and that's work ongoing, looking at comparisons and trying to identify where there might be issues in both in the model and HF radar data. And another comparison we might be able to do under the FLOWBEC project, I had some old radar data from a deployment down near John O'Groats, right down on the southern tip here. Just a few days of radar data, and that bottom plot there is some current patterns derived from that deployment, and this is the bathymetry derived from that area. Just reference that depth goes down to about 50 metres there. That area there is a site that's been quite intensively studied for wildlife behaviour. There's all sorts of wildlife around that reef area there. On to Strangford Loch now. Hopefully you've all seen Jack O'Carroll's poster down in the main gallery there. He's been working with Bob Kennedy and Graham Savage, looking at drop-down video surveys of the seabed in Strangford Loch, and they've done a really quite extensive survey of that whole area in the region of the turbine, looking at spatial variability in what's living on the seabed. And I think one of the things they found is that there's certainly an area of bare cobbles in the immediate vicinity of the turbine, but that's probably not surprising. Even around wind turbines you get a certain amount of scour in the immediate vicinity of the pilings. But work is ongoing looking at how that area of bare cobbles fits into the wider, quite extensive variability that he's finding across the site. So if you want more detail on that, please talk to him. You still here, Jack? Yep, there he is. And this is some of the plots that he's been showing. These are the locations of some of the drop-down video that's been obtained with the turbine in the middle there. And just some shots. That one up there is a nice set of mussels on the actual turbine piling. There's a creative habitat there. That's some of the bare cobbles in the immediate vicinity of the piling. And here's some stuff which I won't attempt to identify as a model biologist. It's a little. And to put this into context, they're not doing this in isolation. Edinburgh University, Angus Creech, has been running fluidity on developing a fluidity model of an idealised version of the MCT turbine, and he's used up fairly extensive amounts of computer time, I understand, in developing pictures like these, generating the turbulent weights of both the rotating turbines and the structures on their own. So he's separated the effect of the support structures on their own, turbines on their own, and the two together. And he's currently working on integrating the resulting turbulence to look at how that would act as a footprint on the seabed, and that will then hopefully tie in with what Jack and Bob and Graham have been doing with video surveys, and we'll see if there's a match-up in that. And finally, I'll just say a little bit about the interest from the sector has been quite extensive in all sorts of aspects of the FLOWBEC project. But this was one of the spin-offs funded by the NERC DEFRA programme, amongst other things, where we did a 3-month deployment of the marine radar at the Magen site, just on a little scaffold tower like this. That's a snapshot of the currents we were deriving. That's the Magen licence area, and this is the Duncan's Big Heads licensed area from Scottish Power Renewables, and on the right there, that's the radar-derived bathymetry for the area, corresponding to the same grid. I won't say too much more about that. David McCann's going to do a final talk on that and talk in a lot more detail. I will finish there with a great big list of acknowledgements. There's many others who have contributed. It's a huge group effort. the team have done an amazing job so far, and we've still got time to run working out all the data. So I'll stop there.